Welcome back, DIVEBOMB IndyCar Podcast, to the second instalment of off-season 2024-2025. If you haven't caught up last week's episode, do that first. Absolute cracker, a feature-length interview with Hunter McRae, who obviously made his IndyCar debut in 2024. So give that a listen if you haven't already, and then head straight back over to this episode because we have another barnstormer incoming for this episode as well. So what we'll do is we've got Pato news to recap, obviously his FP1 in Mexico City and sort of the reaction to that. Then in September, Zak Brown published an open letter to IndyCar, which we're going to briefly go through. He's made a few suggestions for change, which we'll react to. And then at the end, linking it all nicely, we'll have a little bit of fun and we'll go over our fantasy IndyCar schedules that we've both made up. But we'll get onto that at the end. But as I said, there's not been much news this week. It's actually been quite quiet in IndyCar town last 2 weeks, unlike the first 2 weeks of off season, which was news every single day. It's been rather quiet for the last couple of weeks. So most of the attention has been around Pato O'Ward, who, as we said a few weeks ago, was going to have his FP1 in Mexico City. He did, in Lando Norris's car. Was 0.3 seconds of Oscar Piastri. Got McLaren's new upgrade. We're not a Formula One podcast, so I won't bore you with all the Formula One details, but he did a pretty good job from the neutral standpoint. But obviously, you can't read too much into practice session. But what is more fascinating, I think, is the reception O'Ward got in Mexico. He did some sort of sponsor event on, maybe it was the Wednesday, in some random Mexican shopping center, which I don't know. It was obviously some promoter event with Kit Kat, who is a sponsor. But my word, this was like the people that gathered. This was concert size. This was like it was a proper celebrity appearance almost. It felt like he was almost Mexican royalty. The way you've all seen the images. He's mobbed in the shopping center. There's 3-4 floors of people just staring at this guy, and there's a great image of him in the middle of the stage, just flocked by people. There must have been, I'd say, in the thousands of people there. And look, we see the images. The reception doesn't change when you get to the Salom Hermanos Rodriguez. There's people everywhere. He is like a celebrity, and his influence is clearly huge. And I think the most intriguing thing about Pato is he's someone who comes from quite a small background. He went through the Road to Indy system. He didn't have loads of money. He's a driver who's gone from F4 to the American Open Wheel system, and actually hasn't started off as quite a quiet guy, and now he's just grown his own brand, his popularity, where he is a celebrity in his home country.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think you said he's like a celebrity. I mean, he definitely is a celebrity, and in those parts, it was. I mean, the footage was incredible, really, and I think it was just a big kind of punch in the face to Mark Miles after all of the kind of controversy about, well, Pato's not on enough billboards. He's not famous enough to warrant racing in Mexico. And whenever that was, whether that view was from this year or whether that was a view maybe a few years ago that prevented kind of talks moving forward, it was just so wrong. And I think just seeing that in the crowds, it was up 2-3 stories of people kind of leaning off the sides just to catch a glimpse of this guy. And that's not something that has been particularly familiar with IndyCar in recent times, really. This guy he's a rock star. He had security. He was getting mobbed by people everywhere he went at the track. He was, getting mobbed by people again, and people wanting pictures, wanting autographs, and he's famous over there. And it was just as much kind of justification as you could get for the fans' shouts that this guy absolutely deserves a race in Mexico, and this guy should absolutely be the figurehead of IndyCar, because his popularity, not just among Mexican fans, kind of going wider, further afield as well, is astronomical, really. And he did a good job in his practice session as well. He was very much on the pace. He was putting himself ahead of guys who are, experienced Formula One drivers. And this was in a situation where he was told he wasn't to push too much. So that was a really cool reflection, again, that one of IndyCar's top guys can really stand up to these Formula One drivers. And yeah, it was only a short glimpse, but I think it proved enough. And as we record as well on Monday, there are teasers on Twitter from I think Formula E have teased it. Pato's teased it on his social media accounts as well about IndyCar going to Mexico, and he might get a show run in an IndyCar during the Formula E event at the start of their 2025 season at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. So, yeah, this is all really cool stuff, and it seems like the wheels are being set in motion now on this Mexican race, and absolutely rightly so, because, yeah, contrary to everything Mark Miles says, Pato he's a big name.
Imagine how many shopping centres Adrian Fernandez would fill.
I know, by the views of Mark Miles.
People be flooding in these random Mexican shopping centres to see him. But yeah, no, his popularity is amazing. This Formula E thing is interesting. I mean, it's not very electric Indy cars. Probably quite well, they've got a hybrid now, so maybe you can excuse it. But yeah, that's an interesting one. I don't know when the race is, probably in January at some point, so that'll be interesting. Maybe it means something. I don't know. But yeah, I mean, that's it about Pato news. There's not really too much to say about him. But yeah, it was just very cool to see the reception he got. Yeah, literally every video you watch, he's just being absolutely mobbed by people. So don't know how the guy got a chance to breathe all weekend, because yeah, he's probably more famous than the majority of the F1 drivers in Mexico. I wouldn't be too surprised. So yeah, interesting. As I said, for somebody who comes from quite a minor background, it is really significant. He's got us following it, and fair play for building up. Like, if you feel like Scott Dixon could go into a supermarket in Auckland and he might not be recognised, or Alex Palou could go into a supermarket in Barcelona and probably wouldn't be recognised. Well, I feel like the same isn't the case for O'Ward. So
yeah, no, I absolutely agree, and I mean, I think the Kit Kat partnership as well is pretty cool, because that's quite a significant brand, and yeah, don't know where that came from, but I think Sergio Perez is also sponsored by Kit Kat, so that's an interesting little nugget, or chocolate bar, as maybe it might be more apt to say. But no, it is just incredible, really, that just the kind of punch in the face that Pato has dealt ever since these comments from Miles, whether it's placing his billboards in Speedway or now this, like, people waiting in queues just to not even to meet the guy, just to catch a glimpse of him, I think is superb. I mean, you had even Sky Sports covering kind of his weekend there, which is cool to see from a British standpoint as well. You know, this is a guy who's popular, I mean, almost on a global scale. People know this guy further afield than just the Americas.
Yeah. Let's go on to his. So it's not his team boss. What is that? His CEO, team CEO? I don't know. Zak Brown sort of everywhere, but
I think his official role is McLaren Racing CEO.
Anyway, Zak Brown wrote a letter titled "The future of IndyCar is bright, but we need to keep pushing forwards." Now, as we said in here, he's got a lot of little details in this, which we thought might be interesting to go through. We did this a few weeks ago, but it's more in that time linking into the Pato news. And there's quite a lot to read into this. We won't read the whole letter because the read time apparently is 18.1 minutes. It'll take me even longer to read it out. So a lot of it will be paraphrasing. This was written just before Nashville, so that's what his sort of introduction is. Then proceeds to mention Fox, but he says, again, there's more that they can do to grow the sport, and he mentions that beneath. So the first thing he sort of talks about is the calendar. Obviously, they're doing it so it's not clashing with the NFL, but the championship's 6 months long because of that. But he believes they should expand into further markets, especially in the West Coast and major metro markets. He suggests a return to Denver, and Watkins Glen is a noticeable absence in the Northeast. Then continues to say they should look at stadiums and convention centres in big markets, such as Toronto and Long Beach, and consider investment in venues like Las Vegas, which has led to significant uplift in television and sponsorship contracts. The end of that sentence is, well, the new Arlington deal fits a lot of that bill. It is a big market. It's around a stadium. and it's going to have significant investment, which will bring uplift in television sponsorship contracts. So that is a box which I feel has already been ticked off by IndyCar. Fairly, obviously, this was in the works well before Zak Brown wrote this letter, but that's when you feel is already ticked off. Then you've got Watkins Glen and Denver, which are two he really points out. Look, we're no American marketing gurus, but there are two gaps. If you look at the map, there are two gaps which aren't filled out. So, but the good suggestions, I mean, obviously IndyCar used to go to Denver. We were probably about 4 years old when IndyCar last went to Denver, so probably not the best people to speak about this. But there we are. I was two. I was two the last time IndyCar went to Denver.
And I will have been even younger. Yeah, no, there's multiple bits. I've kind of been through this and really kind of dug into it. And I mean, first of all, in this section, he talks about the variety, which I think is something IndyCar cannot lose. I know with all the talk of targeting these urban markets, you don't want them to lose the kind of diversity that we have on the schedule, because obviously, you know, you've got road courses which in kind of themselves are very varied from one to the other. And I think one of the positive things about Arlington is it's a bit different to the other street tracks that we've got. And then obviously ovals are kind of, well, I mean, I think there could be greater variety. I mean, we'll get onto it momentarily about our kind of ideal calendars. So I think in whatever IndyCar does with the calendar, they can't kind of jeopardize that sort of diversity. I think the mention of the NFL clash, it's just hard to get around it, because if you are constantly living in, well, we don't want to clash with the NFL, you are restricting yourself to this 6-month season. And really, IndyCar needs to be at a point where its season can be longer. You can kind of harness that momentum for a bit longer. I don't know whether there's a way to kind of extend into the start of the NFL season and just race when you perceive there to be gaps. You know, NASCAR does it, and NASCAR still gets pretty decent ratings by all accounts once the NFL season's kind of got underway. So yeah, that's kind of an interesting point. I think the mention of the East Coast and Watkins Glen in particular, I mean, we've spoken to multiple drivers, haven't we? And they've said that Watkins Glen is their favorite track. And I know Mark Miles says that he doesn't want to return to the old, but as I've kind of banged on about, you need a bit of that old with these new innovations if you do want to kind of evolve and you do want to kind of move forward. So yeah, that's interesting. I think what Zak's saying also with the whole racing around convention centres, etc., that does align with what seems to be the series-wide kind of aim, you would say. Yeah, I think it really is about filling all the popular markets and making sure you have your products. If you are going to stick just to the United States, have your product spread out across the country.
And then we go on to more of the calendar. Obviously mentions the NASCAR's new deal in Mexico City. And he says the return of IndyCar to Mexico would be a tremendous success, obviously due to popularity of Pato Award, as we've just alluded to. Mentions previous events in Motegi serve as paradise, but he believes that they should focus on more events in large markets. He says they should enhance the foray to Canada. In the past, they've run in Mexico and Brazil, which are popular with fans. And he believes international expansion should remain the continents of North and South America, and he'll see more growth in markets closer to home. So let's focus on the Americas and not get distracted. It's an interesting point, because at heart, IndyCar is a North American series, and at heart, it should remain that way. But on the flip side of the equation, you will get other markets you might not unlock in Australia, in Europe, in Asia. I think obviously IndyCar priority, it has to stay a North American series, whether that's expanding into Canada, Mexico, or whatever. But I wouldn't be against going more international than that. But obviously we need to start off more low-key at places like Mexico or Argentina or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, again, digging into the start of this section, I think the mention of NASCAR's multi-year deal, I think that's probably said through gritted teeth from Zak, because I think that, again, to use the phrase, it's a bit of a punch in the face that NASCAR have beaten IndyCar to this, and they've got their Mexican driver, Daniel Suarez, at a race before IndyCar got Pato. And Daniel Suarez has a fraction, really, of Pato's following. I know it goes beyond this, but if you look just at social media, and yeah, no doubt, as he says, Daniel Suarez will get a hero's welcome, but Pato is a proper celebrity compared to him. And yeah, I do completely understand where Zak's coming from, actually, I mean, I think you have to kind of maximize what is close to you before you can start kind of going for these bigger steps of going to Australia or going back to places like Japan or even going over to the UK, for instance. So I think that's actually quite wise to do it almost incrementally, and as he says, kind of not get distracted and almost go for too much and bite off more than you can chew initially. I think that is pretty viable, I would say. And yeah, get those US markets sorted, really kind of focus on growing your popularity in the US and in the Americas. And then once that's nailed, that's when you can kind of go for that next step. So yeah, I think that's a good shout from him. Again, monetary wise as well, international races, the contracts, you need to find partners, you need to find promoters that will pay for these events. It's not a cheap exercise, and teams will be very, very cautious of that, I imagine. So yeah, I think you have to build on, as he says, build on the established fan base first, and then you can start going for kind of building these, I guess, more burgeoning fan bases across the globe.
Yeah, I think the eventual goal is you do need to have some international races, because you need to go outside North America at some point. But yeah, I mean, as I said, you need to start off slow and then expand beyond that. Non-championship races are a distraction we can do without. I think everybody agrees. But I would say that was better than nothing. So Thermal last season, even though it was a bit of a mess. But nobody really wants non-championship races, so that's fine. And then he believes they should eliminate double-header weekends, as the races don't add much value and don't add a lot for the fans who are on site compared to the action they're already experiencing in the standard one race weekend. Now, Milwaukee last season's of dropping to a single race. I think that can be somewhat excused because they needed another race somewhere to replace Texas, which obviously went on the calendar last minute. Then you have the Iowa scenario, but I think Iowa's quite a fun weekend. So with all the concerts and a bit more racing, and it's a way to expand the overall presence of the series, because otherwise we get 4 over races out of 17? 5. I can't do maths. But even so, I don't have a problem with double header. I agree we shouldn't have many, but I don't think one a season particularly hurts anybody.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think just to touch on the initial point, the non-championship events, it's not financially viable really, as kind of as a regular thing, unless you are combining it like they try to do with your big testing. Maybe it could be a pre-season thing. All these points we've kind of exhausted. I think my mind always springs back to just how angry Grosjean was after getting such big damage in the thermal heat race. And you're getting that damage when you are playing for nothing, but bar a minimal fee for finishing 6th or anywhere lower than 6th in the all-star race even. So that was just causing a net loss for pretty much every team. That's why that's not viable. I think double headers are interesting. I mean, a lot of drivers are against them. I guess most prominently Alex Palou. He's spoken really against them. I think they can work. They can work. Like Iowa. That's kind of built into this, I guess, sort of big event. And Milwaukee was good when you've got 2 really good races, but I guess Iowa this year also showed if you've got 2 races that are just completely dull and bore fests, that can also not be fantastic. I think it's a hard one because it does give fans kind of more action. I mean, I don't really understand Zak's point that the back-to-back, the double-header weekends kind of don't add much for fans, because I think as a fan you would probably rather see 2 races than a couple of practice sessions in a race, for instance. But yeah, it's not something to do every weekend for sure. I think it's a lot of work, a lot of stress for teams, the turnaround, and yeah, maybe it is best to focus on one race that you are properly, fully prepared for. And also, like the second race, it doesn't always happen, but it can be the case that teams have figured everything out, and that kind of reduces the competitiveness of the second race of the doubleheader weekends as well. So yeah, it's an interesting point. I think the other just final point on that is as well that a doubleheader weekend, while you have a 17 race calendar, last season IndyCar was only exposed for 15 championship race weekends because you eliminate 2 of those weekends immediately. So yeah, it's a good point raised, I think, but yeah, 1 isn't too harmful.
So he goes on to say that practice sessions need some revision. Having only 1 practice on road and street is inefficient for teams and limits the opportunity to gather critical data and further refine setups. Ensuring a high level of preparation will ultimately elevate the quality of competition and the overall fan experience. While I truly believe IndyCar is some of the most exciting racing in motorsport, there was a few races which saw fuel saving remove the thrill of how different strategies play out. Believes there could be a smaller fuel tank or higher degradation on tyres, and tyre allocation should also be considered. There's a better way to balance the opportunity of a tyre strategy with using slicks on race day than all but forcing teams to sit half apart for a practice session to save new tyres for a race. The practice sessions point I somewhat agree with, although I don't necessarily agree that ensuring a high level of preparation will elevate the quality of competition. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think because sometimes you might have a wild practice session which gets cut short of loads of red flags, for example, makes it a bit more unpredictable, spices it up, you can have an interesting race day. I feel like if you have more practice, that's just giving the top teams more of an advantage in some ways because they're the ones with the resources who know what they're going to do. I wouldn't mind more practice sessions, but I don't think IndyCar should go overkill with it. Because I feel the top teams, that would just be an opportunity for them to gather more information which they can utilize better. Yes, it will help with small teams as well, but the top teams with the bigger resources will have that advantage.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and I kind of think the second point that he makes is kind of more pertinent. I think fuel saving racing it's an interesting point. I think ultimately the solution there is kind of improving the tire package. When you have races like Iowa, for instance, this year, where the tire was far too robust, I think that kind of lends into a race becoming a fuel limited race rather than a tire limited race. So I think that's a big part of the solution there. Maybe a smaller fuel tank is also a good idea. Again, that's quite technical stuff beyond our pay grade a bit. I think regardless, fueling is a good thing for IndyCar because it separates the series from your F1s, for instance. I think the tire allocation point is also a good point because I mean he's asking for more practice, but we don't even have enough tires to mean that drivers can run the entirety of the 2 practice sessions at the moment. So yeah, that's another good point. I mean, you often hear complaints from drivers that they don't have enough tires, and yeah, I think good points. Not massive more to dig into there.
Yeah, I mean, just add a couple more tyre allocations to each race, and that's problem solved, pretty much, isn't it? So
yeah, again, I guess it's a
I wouldn't agree with
question.
Smaller, like Long Beach was a fuel save race, but that was a good race. So they're not necessarily all bad. So
no, I agree. I absolutely agree. I guess it has to be a situation where not every single driver is saving fuel.
Yeah,
and you can be in that position to have.
But it's like he's saying he removes the thrill of how different strategies play. Well, not necessarily, because Long Beach was a fuel save for some, and it was a great race. So
yeah, when you have that sort of chase on, it's good. Yeah.
Lots to be excited about in the future, including the TV deal with Fox starting in 2025, will boost domestic audiences, and having every race on a major network is great news. Goes on to say about his friend, but we don't really care about his friend. So still talks about the racing series improve their coverage. He believes that Fox will revolutionise it, especially with innovations such as drone shots, which will follow the cars through the testing sessions or preview the track layout for fans pre-race. Believes there should be more utilisation of onboard cameras such as suspension cam, foot cam, shifter cam, visor cam, and rear wing cam that can help showcase a driver's skill, and also more room for data-centric broadcasts, similar to what they see in F1. Sharing key data such as race strategy, analytics, information, different tyre compounds and wear would engage fans more on the intricacies of the sport. We'll go on to the next bit in a minute. I mean, there's not really a drawback to that. I guess it's a lot of, like, for an NBC perspective, there's a lot of work and resources and information. For a series, they don't put too much investment into. So as long as we don't get stupid AWS nonsense, there's not really any issues with that, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken a lot about Fox, haven't we, kind of in general, and you know, it's a good thing with all the network deals, and I think it's worth mentioning as well. They're already really kind of ramping up their promotional efforts, whether it was during the Cowboys game the other week against the Detroit Lions in the NFL. They were showing an Indy 500 and Arlington promo. They had someone arriving to some, I think, pre-show for an NFL game in an IndyCar, which again, great with 4 months out from the season. Exactly, in fact, as we record, 4 months until first practice in St. Pete. But no, I mean, you kind of brushed over the fact that he was talking about his friend who was the Fox CEO, but you know, he's an IndyCar fan, so I guess that's a good thing. I think it's just worth kind of dwelling on for a minute the stuff about how to improve the broadcast, and I think I'm not a massive fan of drone shots, actually. I think some of the drone shots can be a little bit distracting. But there's definitely more things. I think the biggest thing is having onboard cameras for every car. Alex Palou, the championship leader, didn't have an onboard camera at Nashville, as far as I remember, when he won the title, which I just think is obscene. Again, I know it's a question of money, but it would just improve the coverage to no end if every car had an onboard, because you've got half the field who just don't have an onboard camera, which I just don't think is right. So yeah, I think that's one thing. I think maybe some of the data stuff, maybe making it clearer, you know, what tire. I always get a bit confused with the pylon, the NBC pylon, who's on what tire. It was never really very clear. There could be, I guess, better kind of display things from that standpoint. I think one thing I always think is team radio's not done very well. You hear a driver speaking, but it's not immediately clear unless you recognize the accents which driver is actually speaking. So that's another thing. But I think just generally, if you had an onboard camera on every car, that really kind of boosts the content beyond just the broadcast as well.
And then he goes on to say that a TV camera and microphone and race control would help create a more transparent decision-making process, and that race control has played a major part in races, and the fans should be able to listen in where appropriate and take the mystery out of how decisions are made, and takes a dig at Penske. I don't like this idea. I feel with Indy, we don't have many race control decisions which you think are absolutely awful. I can't I mean, apart from that random one with VK punted out Rosenqvist and didn't get penalised a few years ago, I don't think we have many which are absolutely awful. And I feel like if you're putting cameras and microphones in, it creates a bit of a dangerous game where you've got random, I'm going off track, but the FIA team radio, for example, in F1 became over the line because it's stuff that people like the general fan doesn't need to know almost. Look, it'd be maybe good to have them justify their decision and explain their reasoning for stuff. I don't think that's something which is necessary, in my opinion.
No, I guess maybe in terms of race control, there has to be a way to give a bit more clarity, because it sometimes does feel like penalties. I like the range of penalties that there are in IndyCar, drop behind a couple of cars, etc. But it's maybe not clear, kind of, I don't know. There's not always consistency as such, and it's not always clear what penalties for what thing. And I like that in some ways they can kind of come up on the cuff and say, okay, this was the offence, this is the penalty, but I'd like maybe an explanation. That doesn't have to be team radio and race control, because as you said, that didn't really work for F1. It kind of went, it just went a bit haywire. Yeah, go on. What were you going to say?
Well, I think the penalty system's quite good, because they seem to judge it quite well on the offense, and it's not, this action gives you this penalty. They are a lot more subjective. And I said that you don't feel there's many decisions for race control you go which baffle you. Whilst the system they have is good, and there's not many complaints usually from drivers. So no, I don't think it's an issue.
Yeah, no, I generally kind of agree with that, to be honest. I just think it might be, I don't know, could be more clarity sometimes on what decision making is.
So it goes on to say IndyCar should be engaging with all its fans through the new TV partnership with Fox. Goes on to say how we should promote the Indy 500. Says the IndyCar app has a strong adoption rate of its audience and would benefit from more resources to provide a better immersive experience. I mean, considering the drivers use it, I think it's a pretty decent experience already. From a telemetry standpoint.
I don't know if Zak has ever touched the app, to be honest, because I think the IndyCar app is excellent. They have so much kind of telemetry stuff. You have, you've got the track maps. You can go on for the cars that do have onboards. You can ride on board with drivers during the race for free, and you can listen to the radio of all the drivers as it's played out. Again, I'm pretty sure for free. I don't think I'm paying for it anyway. I don't know if I am paying for it. But no, I think the app is great. It's easy to navigate. You've got the news, you've got the session results, you've got the standings, and it's all really easy to find. So I'm not most sure what he's on about. I mean, just on the historic footage bit, he also mentions about the app. I don't think that necessarily needs to be in the app because IndyCar does an excellent job at having race replays on YouTube. And I think generally the digital content in terms of YouTube is pretty good. Like you have race radios, you have short and extended highlights, which come out in an extremely timely fashion if you're not able to watch. You have, they show best passes,
interviews.
And there's a lot of content on there, which I think is really good. I generally think social media is pretty good as well. In terms of the Instagram, again, you kind of brings out the drivers' personalities sometimes. I think TikTok is a bit inconsistent, and that's something they could maybe utilize better. And just before I forget as well, a point I wanted to make that I forgot to make about sort of getting to know the drivers, their personalities and stuff. And I probably made this point before. I really think IndyCar would benefit from having, and a lot of what Zak is saying is kind of based on his experience in F1 and what's worked for F1, and I don't begrudge that as such. I think in terms of production, which is, again, something I'm concerned about with Fox, one of my only concerns is that I think they've only got 2.5 hour windows for races. IndyCar could really do with pre and post race shows that aren't just, they're just a bit chaotic. Like with F1, there's completely defined stuff.
You don't have to put that bit on network television. Exactly. That bit can go to a cable or an app or something. That streaming. Need to be a network. Yeah.
That can be, but I think they miss a trick in, it's great you've got these drivers going at 240 miles per hour during the Indy 500, but I think often they miss a trick having like features with the drivers, like you might see on, I think they get the Sky F1 coverage in the US with ESPN actually, so they're probably privy to the same stuff if you are listening in the States. But that sort of thing can really get, you can get to know the drivers' stories a bit more, whether it's kind of in-depth interviews or any other sort of feature thing. So I think that's a trick that it misses, and I fear that may continue.
He goes on to say he should give the stars of the show drivers the chance to shine too. Obviously, he goes on to back Drive to Survive. He wants to see their personalities a bit more, but I think, as you said, IndyCar Social is actually really good at getting to know the drivers. They do a lot of good interviews and pretty decent content. It says what NBC something about football does to fans, and they shouldn't be afraid to take a page from their playbook. Pre-driver announcements thinks they could do a lot more. I think they're not that bad usually, pre-driver announcements personally, but hey, I'm not the track. And more improved podiums, that's something that needs to be sorted because some of them are pretty lame.
They're pretty much just boxes, some of them.
Yeah, so that is something which does need some work on. Says the teams need their freedom via their social media channels to bring fans closer to the action and capture new audiences with behind-the-scenes content which feels real and authentic, and they should be allowed to leverage the social channels for video-first experience with pre- and post-race features to amplify our voice and grow IndyCar's audience collectively. I think IndyCar did that pretty well already. But
I think the he did mention team-specific things. Not all teams have a great social media output, I would say. I think you look at Andretti and McLaren obviously as kind of the pioneers in really kind of unique
Ganassi
content.
aren't too bad, I must say.
Ganassi are pretty good as well with kind of, I guess video content's a thing that's really big nowadays. But then you look at the likes of Team Penske, for instance, it's very corporate. Kind of forefront of my mind because I remember them joking about this on Off Track. Ed Carpenter Racing, for instance, I don't think has a TikTok account even, and their social media is all very much kind of, this is what happened in the race, this is our race report. It's not kind of for probably half the grid, it's a bit too much like this. And I think that's another way that you can kind of attract that, I guess, that younger demographic that IndyCar lacks. You really need to tap into them via, I guess, the social media avenue.
So it goes on to say about Liberty Media and marketing, and they should treat Formula One as not as a competitor, but a series we should embrace, and that fans would naturally go over to IndyCar if they just love racing. And sort of goes on to say they can ride the same enthusiasm by showing F1 fans what a great product we have, making it clear it's another form of motorsport and not an alternative. I'd say yes and no. IndyCar would have to be very careful if they were to get close links to F1, because you don't want to come across, particularly to F1. It's not as much of a problem with NASCAR, but to F1 as a feeder series. You don't want to come across to F1 as is almost becoming inferior by creating those closer links, because from that start, F1 will always have precedent. But IndyCar's drivers in a general motorsport scene are severely underrated. People like Scott McLaughlin or Alex Palou, for example, Scott Dixon even. I mean, most of F1 fans probably don't know who he is, but he could be in F1 and he'd probably be a race winner if he was in the right machinery quite easily. So you've got to be careful. Maybe creating links to F1 is good to some extent to help grow the names of drivers, but you don't want to start treating it like a feeder series. It needs to be on shown as a level playing field. Almost.
Yeah, I interpreted it not as kind of, we need to work with F1, and more just, let's not compare ourselves to F1, because I think by that same token, like, if you start comparing yourself to F1 and trying to look like a rival to F1, again, even looking at things as basic as the podium stuff and the production value and the presentation there, you're going to look inferior. Like, it's just a fact. And no matter whether your product is loads better, if you try and go toe to toe and look like, oh yeah, we're better than you, it's not going to, I just don't think it's going to work out. I think that's kind of where Zak's probably coming from. I think there's a lot that the IndyCar can kind of learn from and lean into from the F1 side. You can definitely tap into their fan base, and this is such a competitive product. And okay, F1 is kind of the engineering pinnacle of the sport, but IndyCar's the racing pinnacle of the sport. That's what so many within the sport believe. And I think, I mean, you look at the growth that F1's had in the US, there's no reason why IndyCar can't do that as well. I mean, look at the kind of short time span in which F1 grasped the attention of the United States. It was impressive. And IndyCar's just as good when you look at the entertainment when you're watching the races on TV. And the drivers have just as much charisma, just as much personality. And they're allowed to kind of show that even more, I would say. So, yeah, I think you don't want to look like competition because you can look inferior. You don't want to get too close to them because you can look inferior. But I think you do have to embrace them and say, look, we're another form of motorsport. You are a sports fan. You are a motorsport fan. You will love this.
Says he understands the desire for the charter system, but says what's present doesn't really move the dial. He wants a structure that aligns the teams to the growth of the series, so wants it sort of into a more franchise model with a revenue sharing system that ensures long-term viability. Again, that's all stuff that I'm not very knowledgeable on and probably never will be. And then says, could enhance the work done by commercial and marketing group by actively engaging external marketers. I mean, he goes on about lots of like random sponsorship marketing stuff I absolutely know nothing about, but says the series would benefit greatly from a technical working group focused on enhancing the sport's regulatory development by fostering collaborations between teams, their engineers, and series officials. The work of such a group would ensure regulations not only fair, but also promote cutting-edge technology and competitive balance. That rather sounds all rather waffle to me, but
yeah, you need to get all of your best personnel together to I guess move forward as you want to. If I think we'll get onto in the next section of what he's written about the new car. You want to be tapping into all these personnel that all these teams have. So yeah, I think that's a really good idea to build that sort of core group, and maybe it can, help testing as well. For instance, where there's a lot of speaking about the imbalance of testing team to team with the hybrid, and obviously every team was privy to data, etc. But not all had their drivers in the car, for instance. So that left kind of this imbalance of who had experience with the hybrid, who didn't, and maybe I don't know how feasible it is, but could you put together a Honda core engineering group, a Chevy core engineering group, and they work on a car that is not specific to any team, and just do it that way when you're testing? So then it kind of eradicates that talk of the imbalance. I don't know. I don't know how feasible that is at all, but.
And then the group could also advise on testing cadence and assignments, ensuring greater priority for who's testing, because the hybrid testing was done by about 8 drivers. Says the hybrid was a step in a new direction, even though the debut was slightly delayed. New engines have been integrated as part of very technical issues, and then says the cars are getting outdated, and they need to make cars more nimble and drivable. Well, they are working on a new car, so that will happen eventually at some point. And that's pretty much the end.
Yeah, I think just a couple of other points. I think one thing he mentions is that, I think we just brushed over it about getting external marketers in. I think IndyCar, that is probably the most important thing, is to, increase the visibility for the series. You need to showcase this to as wide a group of people as you can. And ultimately, that's going to take investment. It just is. And I think IndyCar needs to be prepared to kind of put that investment in for the long term gain that could kind of bore out, I guess. So yeah, we'll see with that. The hybrid system, again, I think the jury's still out there. We've seen some good, some bad, not a huge impact, changing the balance of the car. I know that's kind of been mentioned after the recent Indy 500 test, for instance, as well. I think the fact they're working on a new car is good. You really need these best personnel working on that, because if this is going to be in circulation for as long as the DW12 was, then yeah. So IndyCar, I think, with the hybrid, really, and this is kind of more important than the hybrid, definitely, to the series, you are wanting to keep up with these modern trends in technology, because that is what will make you marketable. That's what will make, I don't know, more engine manufacturers want to be kind of on board. So yeah, completely agree. I think the other line I'd like to touch on as well is he says quality over quantity, which I definitely agree. You have to get the quality and get the, I guess, apply it to get the core fan base before you can then, as we were saying, with kind of expanding to international races, before you can then make that next step. You need to really solidify what you have first. So yeah, that's kind of all.
Yeah, I agree with some, not us. The conclusion is he hasn't touched the IndyCar app. Probably hasn't watched IndyCar's YouTube in his life, but he might get around to it. Yeah, some of it I agree with, some of it I don't. I think he's obviously taken a very F1 perspective of it all, and I think you've got to be careful where you don't want to copy F1, because then you're losing a bit of your USP by doing that. IndyCar needs to be different. IndyCar's a lot more personable as it is, and it feels like a lot of what he's suggesting may almost take that away at some points. Like Callum Marlock spoke about this. He liked how IndyCar's so accessible, and you don't want to make it where the drivers as fans are so exclusive where it doesn't become accessible. So you can't do too many things at once. There's got to be a balance of the things you do. Right, I'm really looking forward to this segment. It sort of links into what Zach said, but a dream calendar. So we've got this a few weeks' time before it links nicely to this one. So we gave ourselves a limit of 20 races. We said 2 international races, and we would do. Well, I put dates in mind. Some of them for a reason, some of them aren't. So yeah, looking forward to this. How are we going to do this? Do you want to go one race by one race, or do you want to go all vowels at once and the other person reacts to the other ones, or?
How many races do you have on your hypothetical calendar?
20. I think we both said 20. Yeah?
So I also have 20. Should we go race by race, or maybe go? I don't know. 2 races by 2 races. Should we go 2 by 2?
Okay, can do. Do you want to start off?
Yeah. So I mean,
do you have dates for yours, by the way, or no?
I have loose dates, but
okay.
I mean, this is I've kind of fit mine within the current constraints of March to September. However, if you've got a 20 race calendar, it needs to expand beyond that realistically.
Yeah. Well, mine has. So
okay,
mine
so yeah,
mine starts in mid-February, which is the week after.
Yeah, so that would kind of be what I would do. I think in that case, I would probably have to have more races earlier in the season than I do. But yeah, just going loosely. I would start the season with St. Pete and go on to Arlington. Again, I don't know the exact constraints there. If I'm starting it in February, though, then I might push Arlington back a little. See, I'm doing this on the fly here as well.
So
what I'm going to do, I'm going to say St. Pete into Barber.
Okay, so I've gone. By the way, your point about starting the season early is important. The Indianapolis 500 is my 9th round this year. So, yeah, lots of cramming. So mine starts in February, the week after the Super Bowl, with St. Petersburg start of the season. And the week after, you go to Homestead Miami Speedway, have a nice mid to high speed oval before the Indianapolis 500. Everyone loves an oval to start the season. Homestead Miami brings great racing. Let's go there. It's close to St. Petersburg. I think that's a nice choice.
Okay, so I have 7 races. The Indy 500 is my 8th race, so I haven't got that many, that few before then. So I'll say St. Pete, Barber, and then following on from that is Arlington, because the NFL season will be concluded by then. That's all safe because again, this is probably going to be into March, and that's when the race will be anyway. That early part of the season, so that's a nice variety to start off. I think St. Pete, a raw street course, into Barber, which is a road course, obviously, and then Arlington, which is a very different sort of street course. And then my 4th round would be Mexico, but not the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez. I would try and go for a street race in Mexico.
Where?
No idea.
Okay.
I've not put any thoughts to that.
Fine.
But I just thought, because NASCAR's at the F1 track, F1's at the F1 track, Formula E's at the F1 track, how do you stand out?
By having a Mexican driver. I've gone Arlington in sort of early March. And then 2 weeks after, I said they should go to Austin. Also in Texas, slightly different market. Fun road course, bit of a different road course. It's not as traditional as all the other ones, but sort of a more modern road course would be fun. IndyCar went there once before. But I think it'd be fun to do Austin. I needed a road course, and I think it fits the bill quite nicely. It's a bit different to all the ones we have already. So I think that would be quite cool.
So my 5th race, and then this kind of plays into wanting that high speed over, and this is a bit kind of more extreme than Homestead. I've gone for Michigan. Super speedway before the 500, really get the drivers geared up. I think it's a 2-mile track, so pretty close to what you get at IMS. And then kind of, again, it's looking at how do you fill this kind of early stretch if you are wanting to start earlier, as kind of we have both thought. I've moved Laguna Seca forward to what will realistically be kind of late April.
Fine. So I'm in early April, so I'm going Mexico City. Pato's popularity is proven there. I think it'd be quite a fun track for IndyCar, actually. A bit funky, so let's go there. And then I've said I'm going to copy Zach, because I needed someone to put it in. I've said you need a major street course at this point, I think, just before the 500. I'll say just before. I've still got another 3 rounds, but get fans excited before the 500. So I've said, why not go to Denver? Colorado isn't really anywhere near there. I was thinking Las Vegas. We don't really get the USP. So go Denver, a little bit of space, build up anticipation before the 500.
Okay.
I think that'd be funky.
So I'm then into May, and I have gone, because obviously there's a lot of complaints about how the schedule usually gets very busy and it's non-stop. I have gone for the Indy GP and the Indy 500 as the only 2 races in May, and May is exclusively at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
So I'm still in April. High speed over another one, Kansas, a bit more higher banking, bit faster, and great mile and a half track. And then week after that, so the first week in May, I'm saying Alabama.
Okay. So are you ditching the Indy GP?
Yeah. Well, you'll find out the next bit, but yes, I will be.
So do you want to just...
let's get to 11 points. Fine. So yeah, I've got the Indy 500 next. I think the GP, the racing there is a bit boring. It's fun, but it's not a great race. There's too much testing there. It's a great testing track, but it doesn't add anything, I don't think, really. In comparison to the Indy 500, it's an absolutely nothing race. So
it's a fair point. It's a fair point. So we're now post Indy 500. I'm going to have one more race than you here. I've gone for Gateway immediately after the Indy 500. I feel like there has to be an oval race straight after the 500, so that would be ideal. And then into, I guess I'll just do my next 2 into that Road America Mid-Ohio double bill. Fine.
So I've taken a week off the Indy 500 because I feel going straight into Detroit is nuts. Go to Milwaukee, as you said, a oval afterwards, but a slightly different oval. So yeah, both in 10 rounds each now. Back to.
Are we? Okay.
Oh no, you're on 11, haven't you? Because you've just done 2. So I'll do my next 2. So this is a week after Milwaukee. Drivers can run Le Mans. So there's the option there. If not, they have a week's break. And I've gone Watkins Glen. Get that Northeast market going. Fun little street track and street track road course. And then straight into Road America. I've dropped Mid-Ohio.
Okay. And I must. Hunter Mackery won't be happy if he's on the grid. I mean, we must stress this is very hypothetical. We don't know what contracts are like and clashes with NASCAR, etc. And even maybe with massively underestimated climate for some of these. It's just going to be snowing. So after Road America Mid-Ohio, I guess this is kind of into July now. I've gone for Toronto. It's a good staple. You're racing in Canada. And then I've gone for one that you had earlier, which is Kansas. So you've got another sort of intermediate, bit of a longer mile-half oval.
So I've gone for 2 weeks after Road America, Iowa. Keep the concerts going, but just do the one race. The next 2 sort of come as one, so we'll do them together. You go to Montreal and then Toronto. So a little Canada doubleheader, get 2 markets going there.
I like that. Expansion. Again, Kansas and Iowa could be kind of interchangeable where they lie for me, but whichever side of this race they are, I've still got Nashville downtown. I think that idea of racing down Broadway is still a very kind of big thing, and it fits with what we're saying about IndyCar. They can't just be having races, they need to be having events, and that, if it was to ever happen, is an event for sure. So I've got so Toronto, Kansas, into Nashville, and then Iowa. But Iowa and Kansas could switch around. That is just having an oval race, 2 oval race in that period.
Fine. So after Toronto, I've gone one you went earlier, I went Michigan. Nice super speedway to sort of round out the season. I'll go to my next point as well. I've gone for the Nashville Oval. I think the event you can still host downtown, but the overall racing will probably be maybe better. Do you need another headline race if you're going to do Denver and Arlington? I don't know. But yeah, I like the Oval, so I'm sticking there.
Yeah, I mean, from that standpoint, I just wanted to maintain that balance of street tracks. And I'll say now with 5 to go. Have you got 5 to go as well here?
I've got 3 to go, so you do your next 2 or something.
Yeah, so I omitted Denver from my consideration. So I've got 5 to go. My next 2 races, which is, I guess, again, you've been more specific than me, getting towards sort of end of August, start of September sort of time, is Watkins Glen, again, to satisfy that market, a track that all the drivers love. And then we're going out of North America and racing at Interlagos. I think that would be a fantastic track for IndyCar.
Yeah, fine. I've gone West Coast. I'll save my last one. The next 2 races, I'm just going to do Laguna Seca, Long Beach, week apart. Nice drivers track and a nice street course everyone loves. So 2 stables of the calendar, which keep together end of the season. And I got 1 race left, which I'll save for the end.
I have Milwaukee as my 3rd last race, and I've also gone for Long Beach as my penultimate race. You save one of those kind of crown jewels until near the very end. So yeah, now on to the finale. Where does your season finish?
Brands Hatch.
Brands Hatch.
Close to home. It's old school, fast circuit. Drivers will love it. It's near to my house. Great way to end the season.
So that's very, very personal sort of reasons.
I used to go there, so
yeah. I mean, I'd love it as part of the calendar. Switch out into Lagos and come over to the UK. But my finale, I loved it on an oval this year. I think that's really the staple of IndyCar racing. So my finale, again, this is obviously so contingent on getting fans in. My finale is going to be at Homestead, Miami.
Okay, fine. So just to recap mine, we'll do yours afterwards. I've gone St. Petersburg, Homestead, Arlington, Austin, Mexico City, Denver, Kansas, Alabama, Indy 500, Milwaukee, Watkins Glen, Road America, Iowa, Montreal, Toronto, Michigan, Nashville, Laguna, Long Beach, Brands Hatch. So
I've gone Brands Hatch. That is brilliant. Imagine it at the season finale at Brands Hatch. That would be brilliant. Yeah, so mine is St. Pete, Barber, Arlington, Mexico, Michigan, Laguna Seca, Indy GP, Indy 500, Gateway, Road America, Mid-Ohio, Toronto, Kansas, Downtown Nashville, Iowa, Watkins Glen, Interlagos, Milwaukee, Long Beach, and Homestead. I think another honourable mention is I don't particularly love the race. I think it's too short a track. But also it's the only race in the Pacific Northwest is Portland. So I wouldn't mind keeping that if it means that market stays kind of satisfied.
Right, so what we disagreed on, obviously Mexico, we're going slightly different, Nashville going slightly different, and International going slightly different. Well, I put Denver, Austin, and Montreal, and then you put on Kansas. No, you went for Kansas.
Yeah, I went for Kansas.
You missed out.
Mid-Ohio was one that I've got that you haven't.
Indy GP.
Yes.
That's one. Oh, gosh, my brains now. Gateway.
You didn't put Gateway?
No, I did put Gateway.
Okay.
I can't remember the one.
Is that it?
No, it must be 4. Hang on. I had Austin, Denver, Montreal. Maybe that was it.
Yeah, I think that was it.
It's interesting we picked 3 ovals to chart on the calendar, but all the same one. That's rather bizarre, but there we are. That's quite interesting. Just going back to the olden days. How many? What's your split? I've got 6 ovals, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 road, and 6 street. That doesn't add up, I don't think.
I think I worked this out earlier. I think I have 7 ovals, 7 road courses, and 6 street courses. I think.
Fine.
No double headers.
No, I was tempted to put Iowa as a double header, but I was like, that's not worth it. So, yeah, interesting. I'd like to see that. I'd like to see my calendar. That's why I made it. But I mean, I don't know how far fetched you can really go, but who knows? Who knows? Viewers, if you want to send in your calendar, do it. Well, let's see yours. Maybe if you send in some good ones, we'll share them out on off seasoning in the future, because I'd be intrigued to see what you come up with. See if you are as unrealistic or realistic as we are. Maybe one of you wants to like the Roverland. Add the Texas Rover or the Charlotte Roverland. Imagine that. I don't know how IndyCars would be set up for that one, but that'd be interesting. And as we always do, we end off with the history. We feels like we're doing this for ages, but I thought about it. It's still like almost 100 years away from where we are today. So we aren't very close, are we?
I know it feels like we're getting modern now, but nope. I am on for 1930 to 1935, and my story comes from the very start of that time frame, and it is one involving a man called Chet Miller. I hope I'm pronouncing his first name right. He made his Indy 500 debut that year. His full name is Chester Joseph Miller. He actually unfortunately lost his life at the Speedway in practice in 1953, which I guess shows his longevity. That was 23 years after he made his debut. He was 50 at the time that he passed in that accident. He was nicknamed the Dean of the Speedway. He finished third. That was his best finish in 1938. He started 16 Indy 500s. He was in the top 10 5 times, and he was in the top 5 twice. But back to his 1930 debut, he was forced to stop just before the midway point of the race. And, that may just sound mechanical failure. That always happens in those days. And it was discovered he had a broken right front spring on his car, which at the time was called the Fronty Ford. And he couldn't return to the track until that was fixed. So his crew had to search out for replacements. And many of the parts came from Model Ts, which are, they're regarded as the first mass affordable automobile. It's essentially, if you picture the classic stereotypical olden day car from that sort of 1930s generation, that is what a Model T is. And it just so happened that his crew found one parked in the infield at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. This was a car that belonged to a spectator. And without asking, because there was no way really of tracking this spectator down, in kind of their desperation, the crew took this part from this fan's Model T to put on Miller's Fronty Ford, and within 41 minutes he was back out on track and finished 13th with a right front spring that belonged to a spectator. But this spring wasn't stolen, it was only borrowed, because with the owner still nowhere to be seen, still thought to this day to be unaware of the situation, the spring was reinstalled to his car, or his or her car, and it was good as new again. So the modern day equivalent, imagine Joseph Newgarden having a suspension failure, and Team Penske go and find a fan's Ford Mustang to go and take apart to fix the car. That is the equivalent, and that is the sort of wild thing that we had going on in the AAA Championship or the Indy 500 back in the day.
I love old IndyCar. You never get that nowadays. I've seen this before. There's been a few mixed reports whether the owner was found or not. So it is a bit of a weird one. Maybe we'll never know, because they are probably died about 50 years ago. But yes, we'll never know. But yeah, quite a funky one. I think that's the coolest one we've had so far. So
yeah, that's what we're aiming for every week, listeners and viewers. That sort of outlandish story.
Yeah. If you have any, again, send them in. We'll see in the future weeks. In this IndyCar off season, if you want to find something to do, or if you're getting to the Halloween spirit, you can head to the Formula Model Shop website, because for probably 1 week and 1 week only, they have an IndyCar pumpkin template. So if you want to carve a pumpkin with the IndyCar logo in, head to the Formula Model Shop website, because they have a free pumpkin template which you can download virtually and can carve out a pumpkin with an IndyCar logo in, which is probably something you didn't expect to hear at the start of this podcast, but there you go. So if you want your pumpkin templates or any other IndyCar merchandise, you can head to Formula Model Shop, which is the best place to get your IndyCar merchandise in the UK and the rest of Europe.
Maybe not on your pumpkin template, but on any other products, you can use the discount code 5BOMB, or one word, FIVEBOMB, to gain 5% off products on the FMS site. Visit the highlights on the DIVEBOMB Motorsport Instagram account for a link to an exclusive VIP section on the FMS store, courtesy of DIVEBOMB.
Or you can head to the DIVEBOMB website, where you will find a banner on our homepage which takes us straight to the Formula Model Shop website, or you can go to formulamodelshop.co.uk.
Stay tuned for exclusive giveaways, events, and other content, and enjoy your pumpkin carving.
But yeah, I think that's all we've really got time for this week. Obviously, a bit on Pato, quite a lot on Zak Stetter, and then a fantasy calendar at the end, which was quite fun. So, as you could probably gather by now, it is the time of our season where it is a bit quieter. It is a bit more, well, I don't say boring, because our content is always amazing, but there isn't as much going on to talk about. But obviously, throughout the off season, there will be more for us to talk about. Again, we'll deal with them next week. We have some plans coming up for the next few weeks. Hopefully, which should all be really good. But for this week, hope you enjoyed. Send in your calendars. We'll have a look at them and maybe react to them in some future episode. But for this week, thanks very much for watching. Thanks very much for listening, and we'll see you next time.